Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
And if you're new to our podcast, David and I are two superfans from totally different generations that take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
And today we're going to be breaking down not only the very memorable, but also the very heartfelt episode called Never Name a Duck.
And our episode discussion will be even more special because we're welcoming back a very special guest, the one and only Larry Mathews, for the second time on our podcast. Welcome back, Larry.
Hey, guys. Thank you. Good to be here. Abby, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. No problem.
So Never Name a Duck was the first episode of season 2. Larry, maybe you could help us understand better. What was your shooting schedule like for the show? When did you begin and when did you typically end your shooting for the year?
We would basically wrap around, I want to say the end of April, somewhere around there, because then I had to go back to my normal grade school for like the last 6 or 7 weeks of school, which went into June. So I'm going to say like around the end of April. And then we would pick up again, I believe in August is when we started filming again.
Yeah, this says filming date August 7th. So yeah, that kind of tracks.
And
that's just a week before you and Rosemary's birthday, is it not? Is it just a week before
It
that?
sure is. Yes, it was. Yep.
Written by, of course, Carl Reiner in July 1962, revised August 3rd, 1962, filmed on the 7th, and eventually airing on September 26th of 62, and still directed at that point by John Rich. So John Rich would finish up in the middle of the second season before he handed off to others, including Jerry Paris, but John was still there. So yes. I thought I looked up some history of the time, which is sort of interesting. This episode was filmed just days after Marilyn Monroe died from her fatal overdose.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That's cool.
And popular songs of the time were "Roses Are Red" by Bobby Vinton and "Breaking Up Is Hard to Do" by Neil Sedaka. So that helps cement for me like the time frame of what was going on when this episode was produced.
That's cool.
So Abby, you want to give us a episode recap?
Let's see. I have a few here, but this one was weird because I don't think it captures the episode at all. It says, when one of Richie's 2 pet ducks dies, it seems as if the Petrie family has lost one of its human members, which I guess they're talking about the first duck. It didn't make sense, I didn't think, but that was an actual synopsis.
It's not very accurate at all.
It isn't. It isn't at all.
That's not even close to what the episode was.
Yeah.
Right.
No. I have one that says Richie becomes very attached to 2 baby ducks that were left over from a show and adopts them. Rob faces the task of making Richie understand the consequence of trying to keep pets that may be happier living in the wild. So that's a little better.
A little more spot on, yeah.
That's definitely a little much more real, of what the episode was about, for sure.
Yeah. I like this one the best, which says, when Rob brings home 2 ducks, his son Richie names them and begins to take care of them. When one of the ducks dies, his attachment to the other one becomes stronger than ever. That's that almost sets it up, right? It doesn't tell you the outcome, but it certainly lays the foundation for what will come. So
definitely, yeah.
I think that's a good analogy there. That's a good synopsis, I should say. Yeah.
So now this, Larry, is your second time on our podcast. The first time we talked about the woodpecker episode, and I'm just now noticing that your 2 kind of episodes where you're kind of the star have animals in them, which I think is interesting. But
I think it's cool. I mean, it's funny. Even like there's an episode we did where Buddy. It was in the first season where Buddy had to leave his German Shepherd with Rob and Laura, and Richie was very frightened of the dog, and then of course Richie becomes like best friends by feeding it chopped liver or something. I forget what it was at the end of the episode. And I love animals. I think all they were animal people. Sheldon was an animal person, and I think that was. I'm glad he did that because it just kind of made me feel very at ease doing those kind of episodes, right?
Yeah. As a kid, I learned from the episode kind of about empathy for animals and, it kind of made an impact on me of like, don't keep animals in cages and things like that. Those are things I still carry with me today,
That's very.
Did you have a pet at home, Larry, when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah, of course. And the one sheet I sent you, I think on the back, there's a picture of me and our dog.
Yeah.
The dog's name was Pookie because we love Soupy Sales, so we named the dog Pookie.
Oh,
That'll date you for sure. You know, I'll give you an idea of the time we're in. We had dogs all our life, basically, as growing up as kids, and and again, Jennifer and I have had, 3 shepherds over our years together, and we love our animals. They're like our children, and that's what they become. And so, for Richie to respond that way, it's almost like the brother or sibling he didn't have was kind of that animal became that figure in a way, right?
yeah.
I was on vulture.com, which is an entertainment site, and they ranked this episode like the 27th in all the episodes. But more importantly, they called it Larry Mathews' finest hour, which I thought, or finest half hour, which I thought was just spot on and such a cool thing to have said.
I've said over and over again for years in several interviews, yes, it was, in my opinion, it was the best performance I ever did in the show. It was just a real highlight for me, and as probably I've said in several interviews and stuff over the years, when people ask me what my favorite episode was of the Dick Van Dyke Show ever, it's hard for me to say one because there are so many amazing episodes. It's like pick your favorite song. Well, if you're a music person, that's a hard thing to do, right? But I always say, if you want to know my favorite Richie episode, hands down, it was Never Name a Duck.
Very cool. Now, David, do we want to run down the kind of other players in the show?
Yeah, we'll have a little discussion. So because there's a great scene that we'll talk about in the veterinarian's office, right?
And I'm also wondering if Larry, if you had any interaction with these other actors in this episode, and if you had something to share about them as we go through it.
Okay.
The first person that we run into in the veterinarian's office is Jane Dulo, who of course was on a number of Van Dyke episodes, right? She was on Never Name a Duck. She was in Death of the Party, Young Man with the Shoehorn, with Dick trying to get the shoe on her foot. There's no sale like wholesale when they're trying to buy the wholesale fur coat for Laura, right? Probably best known for her role on McHale's Namey as the man-hungry nurse. But what are your recollections, Larry, of Jane? Do you have any?
Yeah, so it was great because when any of reoccurring guest stars would come on the show, they were kind of like our semi-family because they'd been there so many times. So even though I wasn't in all the episodes where she was in it, she was sweet, she was kind. Everybody would treat everybody with respect, and she was just kind of taken in as one of the gang during those shows, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's so good to hear.
And she was very good friends, I understand, with Richard Deacon.
Evidently, I've heard that as well, David, and yes, and of course, Deacon was such a wonderful, wonderful human being.
One of the other people was Jerry Hausner, again, also on 6 episodes of the Van Dyke Show.
And also in a lot of episodes where he's not credited, but you can see him, in the crowds and things
probably
like
best
that.
known, really, as Ricky Ricardo's manager on I Love Lucy in the decade before, but he was on Dick Van Dyke Show episodes, Where Did I Come From, Punch Thy Neighbor, Never Name a Duck that we're talking about, Ray Murdoch's X-Ray.
We'll see later in his scene why I think he's most memorable for this episode. He has one of the best, one of the best scenes.
And finally, we had Geraldine Wall, who was Miss Glassett, the cat owner in the veterinarian's office. And she had a great role here, but in later episodes went on actually to play Laura's mother in 2 episodes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
In your episode, What's in a Middle Name, for about Rosebud. And then the plots thicken where they're arguing over who's going to be buried with which parents or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and of course, it wouldn't be a Dick Van Dyke Show episode without Frank Adamo making an appearance as the veterinarian's assistant in the vet's office.
Yep. Yeah.
It just works. Yep.
All great staples of our show over the years. Obviously, Frank, you've talked about over and over again, and he was just a special person, but he was always so good at whatever he would do for us, right? It was just, there was like, no problem, he'll do anything we ask, and it was great, right? The woman who played Laura's mother, I remember her very well because she was just so sweet to me, and always just, oh, Larry, how are you? And more of a mothering figure, in a lot of ways, right?
Uh-huh.
And then Jerry was just a funny guy. I loved him because he was always fun to be around. He just would make you laugh. He was one of those guys that, he'd come as a guest star, and he was always like, like more, always happy, always fun. Everything was great. Everything was good. And it came off in the episodes he did, I think.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And I always think you can tell a great director, a great creator, or writer based on who they cast in the smaller roles. And it's usually you can tell because all of them are just so well picked and they're the best at what they do. And that creator goes, "You're the best at this, you're the best at this, let's put you all together." And it's almost like everybody's at the top of their game. It really ups the show, I feel like.
I also think that, to your point, Abby, exactly. And that if you're a writer, creator, and you find chemistry that works with the other cast members as well as the cast members do, you want to use that formula when you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
And John Rich was a master of that, wasn't he, Larry?
Yeah.
John, we've talked about this, David, over the years. I can't say enough wonderful things about John Rich. Now, I got a chance to work with John later in life when I was working on Benson, and he was directing our Bensons. And of course, I watched John be very gruff and as a tough director to the people around him, and very kind of demanding. But keep in mind, this is John Rich now later in life, who had had so many accolades, had won awards, was one of the top directors in our field, and for me, from my point of view, probably one of the most influential people in my career in terms of helping me out with things, right, and giving me direction, and always just being there for me when I asked questions or wanted to know something. John's how I really found the interest to get behind the camera and behind the scenes, because of John.
Do you think he was more mellow when he was doing the Dick Van Dyke Show?
I'm not sure mellow would be the word. I would think he was more, maybe mellow is the good word for it, I guess, Abby. I think that he just was, he was just in a great spot to be, to learn his craft and advance his craft and just do well. But if you look at John Rich's career, he did a lot of directing way before the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yes.
I've seen him, credited on episodes of Have Gun Will Travel, directed by John Rich. You go back to some of the Westerns directed by John Rich, right?
Yeah, Gunsmoke he did with Rosemary. He cast Rosemary in Gunsmoke.
Gunsmoke. Yeah.
I did talk to John several times, and we talk about his gruffness and like you said, the demands. And what John told me was there were times that he felt as though the cast felt like he was pressing them. And his reason for that, and he said to them once, "Don't you want to make sure years from now when people watch this that you gave your 100% to this scene that we're doing? So if we want to do it again to get it better, then let's do it." He said they sort of reacted to that and then got on board.
John was brilliant at motivation. And as you said, maybe sometimes pressing, but, you look at successful people in professions, look at a successful coach of a sports team. He'll do that to the extent where he's not going to bully them, but he's going to make them think of how they can be a better athlete, a better actor, a better performer. This is what great coaches, directors do.
Typically, we now give a little discussion of the scenes, Abby. So you want to kick that off?
Yeah. The episode starts in the writer's room. So we actually don't see Richie yet. We get kind of a prelude to the plot where the writing staff are wrapping up a rough work week, and Mel enters with this box, and in it are leftover props from a recent show, toys mostly, and things like that. And so he says, you can distribute these amongst yourselves. I'll leave this box here. And so most of the scene is them going through this box, pulling out items, making jokes about the items, kind of shows all different things in that moment. Different personalities, we hear like, oh, Sally has a cat, things like that. We pick up a lot of this other backstory. And then what happens, though, is that there is a box with 2 baby ducks in it that they pull out and kind of try to decide who's going to take responsibility for it.
And Sally says, "Well, they can't come home with me because Mr. Henderson, my cat, will eat them up." And they look at Buddy, and Buddy says, "Well, I'll take them. My dog likes in between meal snacks, right?" So, but ultimately, Rob takes this little duck and is rubbing the fuzz against his cheek.
Oh, that
And,
part's so funny.
his line is, I think I'm in love.
Come on, fellas, you're coming home with me.
Just Dick being such an amazingly talented individual. He could do stuff like that and just pull it off so brilliantly, right?
These ducks, Larry, what was the situation like? Like there was a bunch of ducks, there was one or two. Like, did they have a wrangler? Like, how were they on the set? And did you get to interact with them a lot?
So the baby ducks, I did because I was like Dick. I'm like, oh, how cute! I saw that one rubber kid, right? I love it, right? But then the actual ducks, we only had two on the set for the rest of it, and they were the two adult ones that you see in basically the rest of the episode as we go on, right?
And this was before the days of PETA, or maybe it wasn't. But I wonder if they were they kept humanely? Did you think, or was there some sort of I know there wasn't as many rules back then, there that kind of thing.
Yes, Abby, there were handlers, of course. They were whenever we did any shows with animals, we had trainers and handlers that were there. That was just the law you had to have. You couldn't just grab a couple of animals and go throw them in there with the rest of the people. That just didn't. Right. So yes, in all those, we had handlers, trainers. We would call them the trainers, or basically handlers, as you said. And they were there whenever we did a show with animals in it. Yes.
Probably the baby ducks were easy compared to that kangaroo, having a kangaroo backstage, right? I've seen a behind the scenes photo where the kangaroo's there on a leash and Ronnie Jacobs is in the background and Dick and Carl, and they're kind of all looking at it like, oh boy, what's going to happen here?
I remember the kangaroo being there too, and I didn't get very close to it, but I was just like, this is so cool, man. There's a kangaroo. What's going on here, right? Anyway.
Very brazen of them to do all of these animals in one episode. I mean, that's a lot to take care of. That's very cool.
Right.
Well, we arrive at the Petrie home. Rob sneaks in, trying not to reveal that he has the ducks, and hides them in the closet. But Carl writes a great setup scene here because Laura startles him, right, as he tries to quickly hide the ducks and get the closet door closed, which he did with like kicking his leg, like this gymnastics sort of.
Yeah, I think he's kissing Laura and kind of like whips his leg around to kick the door closed behind him. It's just so funny. So physical.
Some of the banter here between them I thought's worth going over, which was Laura says, oh, why the big sexy hello? Did you smash a fender? How much did the dress cost? She's sort of like prompting Rob.
And he says, well, did you? And she says, I love you. I didn't. And $12.95.
Right.
And Rob immediately transitioned to, well, where's Rich? This is the great line. I don't want him popping in on us suddenly.
And she says, oh, what did you have in mind?
Right. Yeah.
And the look that Mary gave them, sort of the sexual tension that was there very subtly, but it was definitely there. And Rob says, you've been watching too many Italian movies or something like that.
Right.
And then he tells her, well, something to tell you. I brought home a couple of house guests. And she immediately assumes it's Buddy and Sally, and that she's kind of distressed because she's like, well, I was going to serve leftovers, and you invited them here for dinner. And there's this really funny leftovers joke, which I always die laughing at, but sometimes people, I feel like they don't get it. But the whole spaghetti for breakfast, like she says that he says, how come we ate leftovers? We ate out last night. And she says, well, we ate breakfast in. And he says, leftover eggs? She says, no, leftover spaghetti. So just like, and their faces are so hilarious. They're just like disgusted with themselves that they're eating spaghetti. So funny. Then he reveals that no, not Buddy and Sally, that he has the two guests. They're in the closet in a box.
But as he goes to get them out of the closet, whether this was a John Rich thing or a Dick thing, he trips over the step heading toward the closet. Just those subtle little things that become embedded in the storyline, but give Dick the opportunity to display his agility and his physical comedy.
That continues that character trait that he's kind of a klutz, and then he can use that for all this comedy. And then also, way to make just like a boring, mundane walk across the living room. Might as well throw a little fall in there, It just makes it so much funnier.
So I have to interrupt you for a second on that particular thing, and I'll tell you, most of that was all Dick. Okay, that was Dick just basically kind of ad-libbing those things, throwing them in, and after they were so perfect in the first season or so, then he was encouraged to do it whenever he could.
Excellent.
By Carl and of course John, but it was a Carl thing. No, do it, man. Do your slapstick, do your thing, man. Be it, Dick. And so when he would find a moment, he would just throw it in there, and it was perfect. Just FYI.
What a good working collaborative way to do things.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Because he could have just gone to the closet and gotten the ducks, and we would have been fine with that. But the fact that he trips over it just makes it even more Rob Petrie.
Right.
So Laura doesn't want to see the duck. She's like, keep him away from me. I'm going to get too attached. I don't want to look at like, keep him away. And so, of course, there's this kind of push and pull the whole scene where he's trying to show her the ducks and she's like, stop, put him away. And so he has some really great lines. Come on, fellas, settle down. He puts the lid back on. He's always sort of like talking to them on the side, which is so cute.
There's a little back and forth of where the ducks are chirping, which I thought, again, how do you get ducks to chirp? So just by some luck, or was that not really the ducks, Larry?
I don't remember, honestly. My guess is going to tell me that they probably were chirping on their own because that's what they do.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember when we shot that scene, and I don't remember a lot of the noise when we shot it, but they might have recorded and moved it in later.
And Laura, to attempt to not hearing the ducks chirping, starts to plug her ears and sing way down upon the Swanee River.
Yeah.
Get away from the ducks.
We have finally Richie entering in a bathrobe, basically. I feel like Richie, the character, they put him in the bathtub a lot. I don't know why. I think it's just because it's off stage. We don't ever see it, so it's a good explanation of why I wasn't there.
You have to have clean kids, right? Come on, let's be real. And back then,
Yes.
I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, after dinner and time to take your bath before you go to bed, right? So it was the thing of the 60s, I guess.
Well, Richie appears and Rob attempts to conceal the ducks behind his back, but eventually you're pretty good, Larry. You spot the box and you say you hear a baby chick.
And I think if I remember correctly, I said, like, what do you got, Daddy? What do you have? What do you have? Or something to that effect, right?
Yep. Rob's trying to pretend that it's him that's chirping, whatever, and Laura tries it. And at this point, you basically discover you've got, well, what Richie thinks are chicks.
Right.
And then the best line, Laura says, show him the ducks. And then you have the best delivery there. Ducks! Like, it's so real. It's the cutest line ever. I like just smile so big when it's ducks. And the way you have your arms out.
It was just so easy for me to do those. Any job, when you really enjoy it and you believe it, it just comes naturally for you, right? And that's kind of the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
In dress rehearsal, did you also rehearse with the ducks so you knew what was coming?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
You open the box and promptly name them Oliver and Stanley, which, of course, is an inside joke at the time.
And who do you think came up with that?
I'm thinking Dick, right?
It was Carl and Dick, basically, really. Obviously Stan and Oliver. And Carl was like, yeah, that's perfect. Let's just do that.
You say, look at the
That's
flat
great.
mouths they have, and they educate you and say, well, they're called beaks, Richie.
And, here Rob's just waffling between being like a responsible parent and then also telling Richie, well, we can't have them, but then also slowly falling more in love, watching Richie fall in love with the ducks. And they just get, he just gets increasingly attached as the moment goes on. And he says, look, honey, we're stuck. He's got names for him already. It's like, come on, like give in,
What a great out for a husband.
Yeah.
Come on now. You can't
So
take
good.
kids' ducks away. What's wrong with you?
Mary's line is Laura, those cute little balls of fur are going to grow into big, fat, noisy,
That's
dirty,
what I could-
dumb ducks. Harl's writing. Great.
And by the way, it's true. Sorry, guys. It is true.
Well, and then the scene closes out where we get the joke coming back around of Oliver and Stanley because Rob says, well, here's the upside. We can have fresh duck eggs every morning. And she says, from which one, Oliver or Stanley? Which I thought was pretty good.
That's right. I forgot about that. That's a great
It's a
line.
great one.
Clearly, time passes. We have a new scene, and Laura's on the phone talking to Millie, apologizing for the loud quacking of the ducks, which apparently can be heard over at the helper's house.
That they're fully integrated into the family now, and they're a big part of it.
But at this point, Oliver has died, and Richie has become very attached to Stanley. Laura's trying to explain to Millie, the ducks, the duck sometimes misbehaves, and they have to punish the duck. And they punish the duck by taking away the bathtub privileges.
And then, of course, Laura's great line. Oh, well, you have to every once in a while. They
Yeah.
quack a lot, but they get over it. So great.
Oh, what a good show, man.
We transition now to the next scene where the duck is floating in the kitchen sink. Stanley is in the sink. Now a full-size duck quacking. Well, I think the irony of so much of this is you were at the whim of what the animal would or wouldn't do, but the duck seems like
Yeah.
he's just happy to cooperate and quack and flap its feathers in the sink and do whatever.
A little later in the scene, he flaps a lot and it kind of makes a loud noise. And I think Dick and Mary both kind of use it. They kind of look at each other like, oh, it's really cool.
When you look at animal trainers and handlers and stuff, and they're around, you actually can get animals to do things. So that was basically going on when we shot the scene. I mean, that was there. There was no question.
That is interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, and Richie's trying to feed the ducks cereal, which is cute. Bye, Stanley. Eat your cereal. It's the cutest line.
And off you go to school.
Now, how old are you here, Richie? Or Larry? How old is Richie supposed to be? 10?
No. Richie's his age. So if I was 7 at the time, I guess, or almost 7, right? I would have been.
Yeah.
Right. I would have been 7 like the next week. Yeah.
You're just genuinely tiny.
I'm still small and short. Don't worry.
I can attest to that. Yes. I feel right at home when I'm next to Larry because we're about the same size. That's great for me.
I tell you, it's wonderful, isn't it, David? Yeah.
Well, Laura, says, Rob, we have to find the duck a new home. It's a little foreshadowing here. She says he should be in a lake and not in the sink. And this next bit, again, where Carl comes up with this, Rob says, I had a dream during the night. Stanley was in the sink and I accidentally turned on the garbage disposal. Oh, feathers everywhere.
Laura's
Which
face,
at this point,
like,
the duck flaps its feathers and splatters water. It's like perfect timing there. So I think, maybe you're right. There was a way to coax the duck into doing that.
Decide they need to do something about it. So they need to take him out. He's not doing well, but they know it's going to break Richie's heart. But they know they have to do it for, the sake of the duck. And so they decide, well, we'll tell him together tonight. And then as they're talking, Laura starts noticing even more urgently that this duck is not looking well. It's looking sick. Rob has some great moments. Can't be sure, but I think he might be pale, stuff like, where's his pulse?
Yeah, where can you take his temperature? He sort of looks at the ass end of the duck.
But they decide he's going to take him to the vet.
This veterinarian scene, for so many reasons, is just unbelievable. Now, Larry, we've talked about swing sets before. I'm guessing that this office was probably a swing set on either end of the permanent sets for this, because it was a pretty decently large space.
Yeah, that's exactly right, David. They would set up a swing set. This was one of them.
This scene is wonderful because not only do we get a chance to see all these people shine, but also I think we love to see Rob like a fish out of water, surrounded by this other types of people that aren't him, and just seeing how he reacts in it. We can always identify, being the sort of everyman in this crazy, room full of all these interesting people, and it's the comedy almost writes itself.
This was a great scene. This is one of the I watch this when I see the episode, and I just howl at this scene. It's hysterical.
It does talk about us as human beings, right? We're people watchers, and that's sort of what's happening here. Rob enters to find 3 other adults with their pets in the waiting room, a woman with a dog, a woman with a cat, and a man who's sitting there waiting, and we don't know, what's up with him. As Rob sits down, the duck begins to stare at the woman next, Jane Dulo, who has her little dog.
They have like this staring contest almost.
That had to be just Jane going with the scene because of what the duck did, right, Larry?
Yeah, I'm sure it was. As we entered into season 2, we had now, first of all, we've been saved by Sheldon Leonard, so we had a season 2. Second of all, we all had our chops, as it were, in terms of the chemistry of the cast and things. And again, interacting with the guest stars. And, John Rich, credit, again, would see something, and typically in rehearsal, and then we would, hopefully it would recreate itself when we actually shot it, and most of the time it did. And he would direct us into that area to make sure that hopefully you get that same golden moments as we actually shoot it in front of a live audience.
The elongated stare between her and that duck, and she went with it. Everybody went with it. But the fact that duck just stared at her for this period of time, and the audience loved it, just loved the fact that they were engaged with each other, sort of in a staring contest.
It was great.
So the first interaction with Jane and Rob is they're staring at it's a duck, and she says, "Oh, so it is," kind of thing. And then she says, "Well, how old is it?" And he goes and he says how old he is. "Oh, he's tall for his age," talking about children, And then the best line is Rob's response to that, which is he starts saying, "Well, my wife and I are both tall." And he kind of cuts himself off, like, wait, that doesn't make sense. And he does those moments where he kind of flubs a line or kind of corrects himself. It's magnificent.
She sort of looks at her dog and says, "How old do you think my little Lulu is?" And you can tell Rob is very reluctant to guess, but Uh, Eventually, he concedes and he guesses, clearly missing the mark and insulting Jane. She just sort of looks at him and sputters, duck lover. You don't care about dogs. All you care about is your duck.
So then Frank comes out as the vet's assistant or, the nurse and escorts Jane Doolow's character to, back with the dog to the room. And on the way, they're kind of bantering about what's wrong with the dog. She says, "Oh, has the doctor seen the test results? Boy, I hope you don't have to wear glasses." She's talking to the dog. And then kind of Rob looks at her like, "What?" And she goes, "It's just for eating." She steps in her bowl. She's got to explain this whole story.
We see a little of the dynamics between the other people waiting in the waiting room. Like, that lady's a little crazy talking about her dog and wearing glasses or whatever. The second woman comments, some people get so wrapped up with their pets. A dog is a dog. A duck is a duck. And Rob sort of nodding and Jerry Hausner sort of nodding, right? And then she pauses and she says, but a cat is a person.
Her delivery, it's just amazing. And then she has my other favorite bit from the scene where she says, she's talking to her cat. "Now, the doctor's just going to talk to you." And then she says, "She thinks she's pregnant." And then gives this nod, no, like, nah, it's just not, it's just so
the
true.
Cleverness of Carl here to hone in on small, this is like the aside to where we're going for the finale of this episode, but the entertainment and the little bits, the interaction with the duck, the nuances of the pet idiosyncrasies, just crazy.
The fact that this scene exists in the same episode with all these heartfelt scenes at the end, it's like there's so much goodness,
So away she goes. Adamo tells the gentleman sitting there that Duke, his pet, will be right out. To which Jerry Hausner, in his role, says, "Weirdos. Some characters who treat their pets as if they're people. I'm not going to have my life upset by some dumb animal." And Rob says, "Yeah, exactly." Until the door opens and out comes Adamo with a pet, the kangaroo that we talked about earlier, right, on a leash.
One of the greatest moments in that episode, honestly, when he comes out with that kangaroo. Oh my God.
It really is. Though Jerry's almost like, seems like he's improvising almost half the time because the kangaroo's sort of just going everywhere, walking this way and that. And
let me tell you a story that Frank Adamo told me, and that is, Frank said, "I had to work with this kangaroo." So he said, "I was no fool." He said, "I spent some time with the kangaroo, so he would be a little familiar with me, and I kind of interacted with him." And Jerry Hausner was supposed to do the same thing, but he never did. So it came time for Hausner to take the kangaroo and try to get him out of the office, and the kangaroo had no part of it. He decided he was going to go where he was going to go, and Hausner was supposed to be wearing rubber-soled shoes, which he did not wear. So when the kangaroo went to pull him, he had these leather soles that just dragged him across the floor in whatever direction the kangaroo wanted to go.
And just some of the lines Jerry spits out. He'll say, "Oh, yeah, he likes it here. He's been here for some time." He's sort of trying to make all these excuses why he's not going out the door right away.
Yeah.
And the audience cheers really loud here, too. The audience is roaring.
There is one little weird thing that John Rich must have requested in the editing, Larry, and I don't know if you recall this, but the kangaroo comes out and starts initially for the back door, like would be the exit, but turns around and the head's back in the other direction at the point that Hauser's really trying to corral it and he can't. But they actually took a piece of the film and ran it in reverse for just a couple or few seconds. I don't know if you recall that or whatever, but I'm thinking John Rich was figuring a way that we got to try to edit this thing to have it be cohesive and get the scene finished. Any thoughts or recollections of that?
Yep.
I don't, but that makes perfect sense to me. This is the brilliance of the people who did our show, John, Carl, all those people. And so, yeah, I'm sure that was, a great plan for them.
So then Frank comes out. He says, "That duck doesn't look very good." And he says, "I know, I think it doesn't look well." And he takes him in. So we see that Rob's taking him to the vet.
Rob does share that he thinks the duck is depressed, though, on his way into the appointment.
So then we get home to the Petrie home. And we see Laura on the phone and Richie's sort of at the table, kind of forlorn, looking at his lunch kind of thing. And from now till the rest of the episode, to the end, is like all you, Larry. And you're carrying almost every scene. And especially towards the very end, like all the beats you're hitting, like all these major like acting like I can't believe that as a kid you could really have so many different facets to the performance, you know, so many different moments, so many different beats, so many different emotions, and it's kind of stunning when I don't know at the time if there was a sitcom that was just about kids, if they would have been able to do like even Leave It to Beaver or something like that. I don't know if it had that range to it, you know, and I think you shine on another level there where it's not adult, but there's something there that's you're really speaking from, and it's very authentic.
That's what I would say. I feel it was authentic. And that speaks to the fact, Larry, you've told us before that when Carl hired you, he wanted somebody who really hadn't done a lot of acting.
For me, I was so comfortable with the people. I was so comfortable with Carl and John and Dick and Mary and everybody there. It was just basically very easy for me to just get into the character and become, the son, and also get into your part where you relate to the fact that this is a really tough thing for you to do, and this is, I mean, again, because of my fondness for animals and stuff. So thank you, because I think, there's talent there that we have in each of us, and Carl was brilliant enough to see it and let me bring it out. But it was a natural thing for me to be able to do because of the environment and the people that were there.
Rob arrives home, but no duck. Richie says, where's the duck? I want Stanley. And Rob explains.
Already doing such amazing acting at this point. It just grows. It's this great progression of the scenes. Where is he? I want Stanley. He's already doing just so much work. I think I'd saw in an interview, Larry, that either Carl or Sheldon had maybe like kind of a one-on-one talk with you, like prior to these scenes. Was that before this scene, or was that just before the end? And what did they talk to you about? Were you supposed to be imagining some other sad scenario? Like, how did they get you to this emotional point?
This was a Sheldon Leonard thing as a child, and having the knowledge and talent and being the person I was, that I enjoyed my craft and wanted to do it as good as I could. I went to my mother and I said, Mom, I was sad, but I wasn't like, in the teary kind of really like, just devastated mood that I think came out when we actually filmed it. My mom turned to me and she said, you go talk to Mr. Leonard and you tell Mr. Leonard that that this is your problem, that you want to, you need to cry for this scene, you need to be very upset, and he will help you to do that. So I found Sheldon and I said, Mr. Leonard, I need to do this for this scene and I don't really know how to do this. And my mom said to talk to you because you could help me cry and be very upset and actually do the scene the way I'm supposed to do it. And I have a picture of this. Sheldon Leonard kneeling in front of me with his hands on my shoulders. And he kneeled in front of me behind the door where we went into to Richie's room. He knelt down and he proceeded to tell me this heart-wrenching, horrible story of his dog that they loved and how the dog had been killed tragically in an accident. Kids were devastated. And in about 5 minutes, I was just in tears.
Oh, my goodness.
He said, okay, now you go ahead and do your scene. They said, okay, time, come on set, action, and off we went.
It's like he knew exactly how to stir you up a little bit. He knows your sensitivities and things like that, and he knows exactly how to talk to you to kind of create that feeling. That's really smart. That's really cool.
What I think is fascinating, Larry, is the picture that you mentioned. Knowing that picture was taken just moments or so before you were going out to do that scene, and the intense rapport between you and Sheldon. He's staring into your eyes and you're staring into his to try to get that reaction from you when you go back to that scene. Particularly when you see the picture and then you go see the scene, pretty stirring, I think.
I have to tell you something. Maybe I've never talked about this, or I don't know. There were people there that, how do I put this? They were influential, and whatever they said was just gospel to me. And when I say that, I mean, like, Dick and Mary were amazing. On the set, they were great. They helped me through things. They would advise me. They would do things. They were like a mom and dad in a ways. But Sheldon Leonard and Carl Reiner were basically, to me, just the gods of what we did. And, there was always Mr. Leonard and Mr. Reiner, because that's what I grew up being respectful. And they were this revered individuals that I would go to when I needed any advice or the best advice of something that I really needed to do and do well.
Richie runs off to his room very upset. Rob and Laura say, who's going to go talk to him? And Rob ends up going back for our final scene.
And there's some really good lines in there. Like, I choke up into this episode every time I watch it. There's a line where, Larry, you say, Daddy, is he dead? And the way that you ask it, it's just heartbreaking. Oh, it's so real.
I choke up when I see the scene still to this day.
Oh, wow.
Now, I will tell you, I didn't realize this until most recently when I was doing some research again for this episode. You talked about your bedroom. Actually, Larry, your bedroom in this episode was a redress of the office. If you look closely, the back window is there, but hidden with like a facade in front of it. And you can see the overhead beam and the door.
Well, because it is a different bedroom set than we see later in the series too, right? Kind of is almost flipped, like back,
Yeah.
I think his bed's usually on the other side. And
so you know what that means? That means that the first scene was in the office.
Yes.
So as we are doing the other scenes, the crew is in there redressing that whole scene and making it different before we go to there for the last scene of the episode.
Because you're shooting in real time, right?
Correct.
wow.
Correct.
That is cool. I think that this heads into, I think the last 6 minutes, 7 minutes of the show where it's all Richie and Rob. And it's like the most heartfelt segment of time in this whole episode. I think it starts in the living room and he says, you put Stanley in the lake, it's not fair. He's my duck, not yours. I want him back. I mean, just that whole, just tears. Your eyes were glistening, like you're actually crying. Get my duck away, So he rips away from Laura, goes in that bedroom.
It's real. I could put myself in the reality of what was going on and make it convincing.
Oh, it really was. And they always say too that good comedians can make kind of a sad line, kind of a funny line, and sad and funny kind of play off of each other. And I think when you say something like, "Where are you going?" "I'm gonna go to live with Stanley," it's kind of funny, but it's also tragic and sad. And I think there's something to that where that just shows a great talent there, that you can be kind of funny and sad in the same line, in the same moment.
I agree with Abby. Yeah.
But some of the writing here that Carl did and you and Dick performed, but particularly you talk about, I kiss him on the head every night as an indication of your love.
Right.
And Rob says, but Rich, that's not all there is to love. If I did all the things that were bad for you, now that wouldn't be love at all.
Right.
What would be love? I love the question. What would be love? That you think more of what's good for the one you love than you think of what's good for yourself. It's like he's your dad, truly your dad, and you're just being taught such a life lesson. We didn't give Stanley something that he wanted a lot more than his cornflakes, his freedom.
So beautiful.
Maybe Oliver would have had more fun if he was in a pond with other ducks. We loved him, but that wasn't a selfish love.
And I love that line too, where he says, well, we didn't give him something that he wanted a lot more than that. And Larry, you say, like oatmeal cookies? It's just the cutest. So real again. So cute. Just so sweet.
The whole selfish love concept, I mean, really, that still teaches a lesson to us today in our world. It's particularly now in the midst of our world turmoil and things that are going on. How about thinking about others instead of ourselves?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of Carl and doing a show which had points to it in a lot of ways. Even in the funny comedy shows, there was always a little something in there that you could take away. And this was a big episode of that. And this was the life lesson, as you say, David, and an episode. And that's why I'm so proud of it, because it actually, it did mean something to people and other people, and it did actually hopefully have a effect on people's lives to understand that, and like you said, the selfish love, and because it's not love. And, it was a great moment. I mean, it was, a unique moment for me with Dick, and it was pretty special.
Do you think Carl and Dick were gentle fathers as well? And that's why this works so well?
Yes. Amongst all their other amazing traits. Yes, I'm sure. If you talk to Dick's kids, when we grew up together, he was just a loving dad. And of course, Rob, who I knew very well, and would tell you that Dad was the greatest.
As serious as the scene is, the brilliance of Carl, suddenly it becomes not so heavy, but a little bit more lighthearted. When Rob starts to explain how when he put the duck in the lake, he sort of swam off and up came another duck.
Yeah.
Your line, Larry, was, like Oliver. And Rob sort of said, well, I think a better name might be Olivia.
Right.
Then you transition. Can we visit them? Can I bring them a wedding present? And I want to bring oatmeal cookies and a jar of that black jelly, which you just say without anything, right? The black jelly. And Rob's like, the black jelly? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, it was spoiled in the refrigerator and it smelled like fish.
But Stanley loved it,
Yeah. And the light bulb goes on for Rob. Oh, Richie, that was our $10 of caviar.
We were saving that for a special occasion, which then kind of sets up the final line where Dick and you are embracing Larry, and Rob says, well, this was a very special occasion. And it's so touching. That final embrace, it's so special, so sweet.
Oh, yeah. A great, great scene. And to me, a life lesson for us all, even now, some 60 some years later, when you watch the episode. Incredible.
I still carry a lot of the moral kind of lessons from the show with me throughout my whole life now. I even, in my collection of memorabilia, I have a Christian Bible study guide that somebody made using episodes from the show and using the morals from the show. And it's I've never seen it ever. I've only seen this one and I have it, and it's so weird and I love it. But I think that just goes to show that there's this deep kind of moral kind of thing happening, and I'm telling you, I still harken back to episodes as an adult, the lessons I've learned and things like that.
Carl was great because he never wanted to date anything, but in real life episodes, which is what he would base the show on, with people's real life experiences, he'd find a point to make, which was great.
Our tag scene finds Rob and Laura Ritchie coming in the front door from a visit to the lake, and Buddy's there in the living room waiting for them. Buddy explains he and Sally were worried about the duck being sick, and they figured out why, because he's lonely. Rob sort of says, well, we figured that out too, Buddy. And that's why we took Stanley up to the lake and released him. And Buddy says, you don't want another duck? At which point, Rosemary comes in with a duck on the leash.
And she just walks straight through. She doesn't even stop. She just comes out, keeps walking towards the door. She says, I heard.
Yeah, which way to the lake, she says.
That's right. She walks out one door and there goes, I heard.
And I don't know if you even know this, Larry, but this episode and about 5 others actually fell into the public domain and are in the public domain because somehow William Morris dropped the ball back in the day and they did not get copyrighted. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Abby, this might be one of the lessons in that book study that you talked about. I think it is, and they could get away with it because the show fell out of protection. So they were able to do that. You'll often see certain volumes of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and you'll see Never Name a Duck, and I think Give Me Your Walls with Vito Scotti is another episode that fell into public domain. There's 5 or 6 of them that somehow slipped through the cracks back in the day. Well, any final thoughts, Blair, as we wrap up our discussion on this episode?
Yeah, I think we covered most everything. It's just so much fun to go back down the memory lane with you guys and kind of give you some other insights, which you might not be able to get sometimes. So it makes me feel great that we can do that. It brings back stuff for me as well. So it makes me feel great to hear and relive some of those moments that I'm very fond of. I had a good time.
And I think Vulture got it right. It was your finest half hour, although your other half hours were great too. But I think it does shine. This episode just had a lot of laughs, but it was also just this defining kind of heartfelt episode that I think sets off the second season into more heartfelt moments like that. Now it's kind of giving the audience permission, oh no, this is a kind of a deep moment here, and we're gonna have that. We're gonna have laughs too, but we're gonna have this over here, and to have those together, it's a beautiful. And your performance as Richie made the lesson about love and letting go and all that. It just felt really authentic, and I think it's just a beautiful episode overall.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Larry, for joining us, sharing your memories, from working with live ducks to delivering some of the most touching scenes, I think, in the series. This contribution to the show continues to still resonate with fans so many years later.
We're so thankful for you coming on today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you guys, my pleasure. You know that. I'm always happy to hang out with you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Happy to do it, and hopefully the fans love it, and you'll get some good response for some good feedback from it, and then we'll see what happens for the next episode we want to do.
Yes, You're absolutely right. So, fans, we hope you've enjoyed today's very special look at Never Name a Duck.
And if you'd like to get notified when new episodes become available, just make sure to subscribe to our channel, and you can also find us on any of the major streaming platforms.
Remember, we're a community, so we value your comments, your questions, and your contributions to the discussion surrounding the show. So feel free to leave some feedback on our channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com with a subject of Box 7030. For today, I'm David.
And I'm Larry.
And I'm Abby. Thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.